In the age of the video game, tabletop war games still have plenty of fans. Adults and kids alike enjoy following the traditions of a hobby that dates back more than a century. In fact, science fiction novelist H.G. Wells published the first set of rules for these games in 1913. So it's game on and time to rally the troops. In this case, miniature soldiers made of metal or plastic and hand-painted by the players. No detail is overlooked in making these war figures true to the historical period of the game. Players move the figures around tabletop scenery, like chessmen on a chessboard. And this too is a game of strategy and a way to engage in the tactical elements of warfare from the safety of your own living room. Making the miniature figures starts with the construction of a model. Making skillful use of his prosthesis, this model maker expertly bends tinned copper wire into a framework for the model. Each figure will need to stand 28 millimeters tall. Once the wire skeleton is the correct shape, the leg prongs are stuck into a cork. This enables the model maker to get a firm grip on the skeleton as the figure is built up with epoxy putty. A base layer is sculpted using a dental tool. After the base layer has cured, more putty is added to the chest and calf areas. After more curing, the soldier's tunic is sculpted. The surface is pitted to simulate medieval chainmail armor. More details are now skillfully added as the miniature soldier takes shape. A wire is inserted into a drilled shoulder socket, and putty is applied to create muscles. The sleeves are built up and again pierced to continue the chainmail effect. Having received a hat with a rounded brim, this small-scale soldier will soon be fighting fit. He'll be used as a mold to clone an army of identical tin soldiers. Meanwhile, another member of the team sculpts epoxy putty models that are 3 times larger. Well, no one said it had to be a fair fight. These models will be used to mass-produce plastic war figures. Producing a large model first, before scaling down, is the only way to transfer all the fine details. Hair is carefully carved onto the head of this French cavalry figure. Care must be taken not to leave any protruding parts that could snag on the molds made from them, which would spoil the finish of the final plastic versions. With curing time required for each layer, it takes a week to bring this French cavalry model to life. The smaller scale models are now ready to be converted into molds. The models are first arranged on a silicon rubber disc, before each one is pressed into the rubber to leave a small indentation. The models are now removed so that holes can be cut where the figures have left the indentations. The silicon cutouts are removed and a narrow channel is carved to connect the 2 slots. The models are now inserted back into their slots before the disc is placed in a preheated steel vessel. A lid is added before the vessel is transferred to a vulcanizing press. In the press, heated plates squeeze the vessel using tons of pressure. This softens the rubber inside, and as it melts around the figures, it picks up their contours. The disc has been transformed into a mold, and now this new model army will soon be ready to spring into action. The mold maker now carves channels into the silicon mold. The channels link the impressions of miniature soldiers and military machinery that have been created by the models. The channels will allow molten metal to flow into the impressions in order to cast copies. In the storeroom, there are thousands of silicon molds, each depicting different characters and props. Miniature armies can now quickly be made to order. When a particular regiment has been summoned, the mold is placed in a casting machine. As the machine spins the mold, molten tin is added through a portal in the lid. The spinning creates centrifugal force, which pushes the liquid tin into the crevices of the mold. After the castings have solidified and cooled, the tin soldiers can be extracted. Once sorted for packaging, they'll be ready to be dispatched to the gaming front lines. Making plastic war figurines requires an epoxy resin that's used to create a pattern. A hardener is added before the epoxy is transferred to a larger bucket and placed in a vacuum chamber. This removes the air, causing the epoxy to swell. Once the epoxy mixture has deflated, it can be brushed onto the sculpted military models arranged in a steel box. Once the fine details have been covered, more epoxy is added. A chute ensures a gentle flow to prevent a buildup of bubbles. The process is repeated on the other side of the models to create a two-part pattern. Once the epoxy is hardened, the pattern can be milled to make it nice and square. The models now have completed their mission and can be discarded. The impressions they've left will now be used to make smaller scale molds, this time from steel. An automated saw is used to carve small pieces from a block of nickel chrome steel. A milling tool then machines the blocks so that two of them will fit together to create a single mold. A carriage then shunts the block back and forth beneath an abrasive wheel to grind the surface to precise measurements. A mold maker now follows the impressions in the epoxy pattern with a stylus, which in turn moves a cutting bit on the steel block. The cutter etches a template into the steel that's 3 times smaller than the one in the epoxy pattern. A tool that generates high-frequency vibrations is then used to gently polish the etchings in the steel mold. Channels are drilled in the steel to allow plastic to flow into the impressions before water cooling pipes are inserted. The mold is now ready to produce a whole army of plastic war figures. Melted plastic is injected under pressure into the mold. When the plastic is hardened, the machine ejects the figures, which are still connected by runners. This production line includes miniature rifles and everything a toy soldier could ever need, should they find themselves missing in action down the back of your sofa. The plastic soldiers, horses and guns are now boxed, along with instructions for painting to make them both lifelike and true to the historical period they represent. All that remains is for your miniature army to become truly battle-hardened by taking that next tabletop by storm. And the great thing about this type of combat is that the only casualty might be your pride, especially if your kids beat you. But you can always start again and have another go, because when it comes to the world of miniature wargaming, that, folks, is how it's waged.